Hospitals are meant to be places of healing and hope. But what if I told you that some hospital walls hold dark secrets, restless spirits, and terrifying mysteries that defy explanation? From ghostly surgeons to endless elevator rides to nowhere, these true horror stories will make you think twice before walking those sterile corridors alone at night. So turn off the lights, make sure you're alone, and let's dive into 4 of the creepiest hospital horror stories you've ever heard. Story 1: The Whispering Ward. Sarah's shoes squeaked softly on the polished hospital floors as she made her way down the dimly lit corridor. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and slither with every step. It was her 3rd week on the night shift, and while she was beginning to adjust to the silence, there was one part of the hospital she always dreaded: the old wing. Built in the early 1900s, the wing had been closed off for years due to asbestos and structural issues. However, the hospital administration had recently decided to reopen a few rooms to handle patient overflow. Rumors among the staff were abundant: stories of ghostly figures, disembodied voices, and beds that moved on their own. Sarah tried to dismiss them as typical workplace folklore, but tonight, she found herself alone on that floor. As she passed room 304, a chill ran down her spine. The door, which she was sure had been closed, was slightly ajar. From inside, she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. She stopped, heart pounding in her ears. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," she thought, but the whispering continued, soft yet insistent. Swallowing her fear, Sarah pushed the door open and peeked inside. The room was dark, illuminated only by the hallway light spilling in. The bed was neatly made, untouched. But then, the whispering grew clearer, forming desperate words. "Help me! It hurts!" Her breath caught as she saw it. A slow depression forming on the mattress, as if someone unseen was lying there, writhing in pain. The whispering turned to gasps and sobs. Frozen in terror, Sarah stumbled back, bumping into something solid. Spinning around, she came face to face with an elderly nurse in an outdated uniform, eyes sunken and void of color. "Are you lost, dear?" the nurse asked, her voice cold and hollow. Before Sarah could answer, the lights flickered violently, plunging the corridor into darkness. When they buzzed back on, the nurse was gone. The next morning, pale and shaken, Sarah recounted the experience to her supervisor. The woman's expression darkened. "Room 304 has been closed for decades," she explained. "A nurse was murdered there by a patient, strangled in her own uniform. No one's been able to stay on that floor alone since." Story 2: The Endless Elevator Ride. Mark leaned back in his chair, the dull glow of the security monitors casting shadows across the empty office. It was past midnight, and the hospital was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that seemed to listen. He yawned, eyes drifting over the screens until one caught his attention: the elevator camera. The doors on the west wing opened, but no one stepped out. Mark frowned. That elevator had been malfunctioning for weeks, stopping at random floors, doors creaking open to empty hallways. He sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and made his way through the darkened corridors. By the time he reached the elevator, the doors were closed. Mark pressed the button, and they slid open with a groan. He stepped inside, thumb hovering over the button for the ground floor, but a chill crept up his spine. Something felt off. Before he could press anything, the doors shuttered closed, and the elevator jerked to life, descending. Mark cursed, stabbing the button for the main floor, but the elevator ignored him, numbers ticking down past the basement level into negatives that shouldn't exist. The air grew colder, and the lights dimmed to a sickly yellow. After what felt like minutes, the doors finally opened. Mark's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a corridor lined with wheelchairs and hospital beds. The walls were cracked and peeling, the air heavy with a damp, metallic stench. He hesitated but stepped forward, the flashlight flickering. As he moved, he heard a faint, rhythmic squeak. Turning sharply, he saw it. An empty wheelchair slowly rolling toward him, one wheel spinning lazily. Heart pounding, he backpedaled into the elevator, jamming the button furiously. Just before the doors closed, his light caught a figure standing at the end of the hallway. A patient in a stained gown, head tilted unnaturally, eyes dark and empty. The elevator groaned back to life, rising swiftly. When the doors opened to the main lobby, Mark stumbled out, gasping. He rushed to the security room and rewound the footage, desperate to prove he wasn't losing his mind. But the camera showed only an empty elevator, doors opening and closing on floors that didn't exist. He quit the next day, but every so often, the new guards reported the same thing. An elevator that descends too far and opens to a hallway that shouldn't be there. Story 3. The Screaming Patient. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the hospital's psychiatric ward in harsh white light. Dr. Evans leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes as thunder rattled the windows. He was the last doctor on duty, most of the patients sedated or asleep. The storm had knocked out the security cameras temporarily, and the ward was quiet until the screaming began. The sound was raw and unrelenting, echoing down the empty halls. Dr. Evans bolted upright, the hair on his neck prickling. It was coming from room 213. That didn't make sense. Room 213 had been empty for years, ever since a patient named Grace had taken her own life inside, claiming she heard voices in the walls. Maintenance had sealed it off, but now, the door was slightly open, light spilling into the hallway. Dr. Evans hesitated, his pulse pounding in his ears, but his training propelled him forward. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The room was dark, air-heavy and damp. The screaming stopped abruptly, leaving only the hiss of rain outside. He stepped inside, eyes scanning the shadows. The walls were covered in scratches, dozens of them, some deep enough to expose the plaster beneath. His breath misted in the cold air. As he backed toward the door, his shoe crunched on something. Looking down, he saw a small, tattered diary. The pages were brittle, ink-smudged. The final entry made his blood run cold. "They think I'm crazy, but she won't stop screaming. She's in the walls, watching." A sudden gust slammed the door shut behind him, plunging the room into darkness. The screaming returned, deafening, this time right behind him. Story 4. The Surgeon's Shadow. The OR was quiet, the kind of quiet that made Dr. Harris's skin prickle. The last surgery of the night had ended hours ago, but he'd stayed late to review some notes. The silence was oppressive, only broken by the hum of the ventilation system. He was washing his hands when he saw the movement in the mirror. A dark figure in surgical scrubs slipping into or 6. Dr. Harris frowned. As far as he knew, he was alone in this part of the hospital. He dried his hands and moved cautiously toward the door. The OR lights were on, casting a sterile glow. Inside, a surgeon stood over the operating table, back turned. His scrubs were old-fashioned, the kind Harris had only seen in black and white photos. "Hey!" Harris called, voice echoing. No response. The surgeon's gloved hands moved methodically, preparing instruments with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. A chill crept through the room. The temperature was wrong, far too cold. Dr. Harris took a step forward, eyes fixed on the surgeon. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure paused, gloved hands still. Then slowly it turned. The mask hid most of the face, but the eyes were dark, hollow pits. The surgeon raised a gloved hand and gestured to the covered body on the table, inviting him closer. Heart-pounding, Harris approached. His fingers trembled as he pulled back the sheet, only to stagger back in horror. He was staring down at himself, eyes lifeless, chest open, surgical tools glinting in the sterile light. The lights flickered violently. When they stabilized, the room was empty. No surgeon, no body, only the lingering chill. Harris stumbled out, gasping, desperate for answers. The nurse at the front desk stared at him, confused. "There hasn't been an OR6 in use for years," she said. "Not since Dr. Reed died there during surgery. Heart attack. They sealed it off after that." She pulled up a photo from the archives, a grainy image of Dr. Reed in outdated scrubs. Harris felt the blood drain from his face. The eyes were the same. If these stories sent chills down your spine, Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more terrifying tales every week. Share your own creepy hospital experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And as always, stay safe, if you can. Until next time.